In evolutionary theory, a common misconception supposes humans are descendants of apes, and if that's the case, then why do they still coexist amongst us? The truth is our two species shared a common ancestor that existed some 10 million years ago. It's why both humans and apes have graspable hands, large brains, and walk on two legs. However, humans then went on to develop even more superior motor control, advanced processing systems, and far less body hair, the building blocks that led to the society and culture we have today. Apes are our cousins that never quite figured it out, unable to form complex emotions, discern sensory information, and of course display strength vastly greater than the average man. They're a living reminder of the evolutionary path we didn't take, supposing a question of how the world would look if apes had become the dominant species. Released in 1999, Ape Escape is a 3D platformer produced by Sony's internal Japan studio for the original PlayStation. It's the relatable story of a young human boy named Spike, who finds himself thrust through time on a mission to capture a super intelligent albino ape and their mischievous monkey army, who have been sent through ancient history to claim Earth in the name of all ape kind. The game posits a science fiction scenario where apes could have become the ruling class through acts of historical subterfuge, and Ape Escape itself is a playable reminder of the evolutionary path video games didn't take. Although it shares a common ancestor in the early history of 3D games, it took a more radical approach to new gameplay than the competition. Although Ape Escape was initially celebrated for that innovation, this evolutionary offshoot failed to propagate beyond the PS2 era. Almost a quarter of a century later, Ape Escape remains a testament to innovation I adore in games, and years on I wonder whether we saw its full evolutionary potential. Like an endangered species on the brink of extinction, I'd like to make a case for why we should reintroduce Ape Escape back into the gaming wilderness. If you know anything about 1999's Ape Escape, it might be the erroneous fact that it introduced the world to the PlayStation's DualShock controller. With its 6 face buttons, directional pad, 4 shoulder triggers, and clickable sticks, the DualShock created the controller standard we're still using today. To clarify, Ape Escape didn't launch the DualShock, but it was the first Sony-published PlayStation game that explicitly required it. The DualShock wasn't just an evolution from the original PlayStation pad, but it was also a response to a new competitor in home consoles, the Nintendo 64. A powerhouse of 3D games from the then market leader, the N64 was bundled with an interface built from the ground up for the still nascent polygonal frontier. Although alien-looking today, 1996's Nintendo 64 controller pioneered now standardized elements like back buttons modelled after triggers, dedicated camera controls, and most importantly, the analog stick. A new interface that allowed for 360 degrees of direction and variable levels of input. In 1997, Sony would one-up Nintendo's innovative pad in the most lateral move possible, adding not 1, but 2 clickable analog sticks to its controller, and inbuilt rumble. Although we take these interfaces for granted now, it's after years of games that demonstrated and ratified their potential. For example, the N64 controller had been built in tandem with a launch game starring Nintendo's most famous mascot. The analog stick was tuned around Mario having a level of movement control previously unseen in games, and the controller's additional buttons were added to support that freedom. Today, we recognise Super Mario 64 as the common ancestor almost all modern 3D games sprung from. Although it introduced concepts like sandbox level design and a mission-based structure, its then button-based camera control that worked in push-pull with the analog stick became the standard for all console games. It allowed players to set their own viewpoints, and in turn direct how they'd overcome designer-placed obstacles. Ape Escape cannily builds on this foundation. Set in fully 3D environments, the goal is to seek out and capture each ape by collecting a power star in Super Mario 64. Each mission remains the same, but the task of ape napping is complicated by factors old and new. There's familiar Mario 64 challenges like avoiding bottomless pits, defending against enemies, and combing these fully realised spaces. But the apes aren't static trinkets, and instead each is an artificially intelligent actor, with a little life and biography that patient players can study. These nimble primates are quite literally a moving goalpost, one that can fight back, create obstacles behind them, or use temporary vehicles to evade capture. It sounds potentially tedious, But these apes have been tuned to just the right level of intelligence. In fact, some can even be snuck up on and nabbed with very little conflict. Like the push-pull of character and camera control, these apes create a similar push-pull through their reactive intelligence, meaning no two challenges will be the same. In that aspect, Ape Escape blends the concept of a 3D platformer with a child-friendly stealth action game, splitting the banana between Super Mario and Solid Snake, something that later spin-offs would directly comment upon. To give an anecdote, Super Mario 64's development began with a similar concept. Although this character plays a very small role in the final game, one of the first activities designer Shigeru Miyamoto implemented to test the N64's controls was a chase between Mario and a rabbit named Mips. Through the active and improvisational play of the smart and wily Mips keeping Mario on his toes, an entire breadth of ideas stemmed forth, like allowing Mario to step lightly through small analog input so as not to raise the rabbit's attention, and turning the camera and Mario in all directions to allow him to flank and anticipate the bunny in a large area. Like how the DualShock evolved on the N64 controller in a lateral way, Ape Escape evolved on this initial Mario demo by transforming Mips into our closest evolutionary ancestor. With that change to apes came an increase in challenge, like their ability to use weapons and the environment to defend themselves. With this increase in enemy improvisation came a need for players to counteract their antics. Like Super Mario 64 was for the N64 controller, Ape Escape was a demonstration of everything the DualShock's second analog could achieve. So far, what's been described was completely possible with the N64's control scheme, and that is mapped almost one-to-one with the DualShock, which leaves the question of what that second analog stick does. At this evolutionary fracture point, developers universally adopted the twin-stick control scheme for precise character and camera control. As early reviews noted, the N64C buttons were an awkward solution for players to navigate the world of Super Mario 64. For the movement camera push-pull to be more effective, these two inputs would need parity. For the N64 successor, Nintendo had already called their shot by dubbing the GameCube's second yellow-coloured analog the C-stick. As you're likely aware, camera control mapped to the right stick has since become the default for almost every single video game, whether it's moving a character's head in first person or orbiting around a character in third. In Ape Escape, the right stick is used as an interface to input gestures that translate seamlessly to the game's protagonist. Whether they're using a stun baton to defend themselves or a net to capture apes, flicks, spins, and clicks on the right stick marry up to similar motions. This new input allows the player to attack completely independent of Spike's facing angle or even the camera. Where modern games often throw in reticles or magnetic course correction so players never miss their inputs, Ape Escape relies on a player linking actions to camera direction. It doesn't always marry up, but the game's light tone makes the frustration comical. Using the right stick feels akin to playing with a toy, and as if to enhance this metaphor, Spike is provided with a diverse array of toyetic gadgets, effectively turning the right stick into a transforming toolset. Most of these gadgets function like Metroid-inspired power-ups that expand traversal options. For instance, there's a paddle that, when spun consistently, generates uplift akin to helicopter blades, enabling players to access higher ledges and extend their jumps. Additionally, there's an RC car reminiscent of Samus Aran's Morph Ball, capable of navigating tight gaps and operating independently as Spike. This allows players to simultaneously control two entities, introducing new gameplay mechanics such as flanking apes or tackling challenges in tandem. These gestural toys are a great fit for a 3D platformer aimed at a younger audience, and even a stealth action game where improvisation is key to outsmarting reactive enemies. Where other platformers of the era filled their levels with gimmicks or had player characters take on new forms, Ape Escape's gestural gadgets go an extra step in closing the gap between video game and toys. They require play to operate, creating moments of fun even in the small act of working them. It's not about being different for the sake of novelty, but instead, these thoughtful motions are in microcosm what Ape Escape wants to achieve with its control scheme, that eventually these actions become as seamless to perform as a single button press, but with far greater utility. Remarkably, Sony achieved this level of engagement with Ape Escape using a control scheme that we now take for granted. Although Super Mario 64 was usurped by Nintendo's own Super Mario Sunshine, I consider Ape Escape its true Simian successor. Rather than smoothing out camera controls or platforming for the sake of standardization, Sony took the pioneering elements of that game and built upon them. Just as the analog stick revolutionized movement, gestural inputs transformed standard character actions by offering 360 degrees of freedom, variable strength levels, and most importantly, synergy with real-world movements. Not just for the sake of novelty, Ape Escape's cast of clever monkeys engage in an intricate call and response game to drive the need for this improvisational control scheme. I've revisited Ape Escape annually, and thanks to emulation, so can you. This might sound like an exercise in nostalgia, but my affection for Ape Escape isn't rooted in reminiscing about times before back pain and outgoing bills. Rather, it's about recognizing the abundant potential it still holds. It's akin to uncovering the intricate maneuvers in Super Mario 64, which transform it into a dynamic parkour experience. While Sony's offering may not quite replicate that sensation, few modern games possess its own unique essence. So, in spite of my positive coverage, why has Super Mario and other platformers continued to thrive, whilst Ape Escape hits an evolutionary cul-de-sac? The series received a number of spin-offs and direct sequels into the PS2's life cycle, but with each came diminishing critical response. The Japan-only Pipo Saru 2000 was an initial test of the Ape's mass appeal by throwing out the gameplay of the first outing and replacing it with the madcap task of vacuum cleaning monkey pants. Ape Academy was a minigame collection that built on the novel control schemes of the original, but without the substance of a 3D platformer to drive more fulfilling gameplay. Although the apes have an iconic design, it wasn't enough to sell games where they weren't the antagonists. Arguably, the apes were maybe too ahead of their time, as demonstrated by the success of Illumination's Minions and Ubisoft's Rabbids, which have become bankable stars in their own right. So, like the games that evolved on Super Mario 64, Ape Escape 2 and 3 would directly succeed on that original game, unfortunately to mixed results. The second Ape Escape tasks players with the less ambitious mission of gathering monkeys around the world. Although locales might be unfamiliar, the gameplay is anything but, bringing back familiar gadgets and gameplay from Ape Escape 1 unchanged. When the first game of the series pioneered so many innovative ideas out of the gates, it's a difficult act to follow, but additions made in Ape Escape 2 further subtract from that base. The game is smoother to play, but at the cost of friction that drove fun, improvisation, and comedy potential. Increasing the polygon count and texture resolution, the developers opted for making characters overly round and somewhat anime in their appearance, which is counterintuitive to the goofiness of that original game. That anime factor unfortunately hits its peak with the introduction of boss fights, led by talking apes that unfortunately fell face first into the uncanny valley. Fortunately, or perhaps unfortunately due to being the last in the series so far, Ape Escape 3 would massively improve over the second. While this so far final outing doesn't quite match the excellence of the first, it's a worthy follow-up that brings small innovations that at least do move the series forward, in a way the best platformer sequels do. Ape Escape 3 introduces a genius concept that, rather than sending apes through time or space, we're brought into their world as they transmit a brand new television station across the planet. You're tasked to infiltrate the Simians television station to round up offending monkeys and shut down their illegal broadcast. Using this setup of apes on TV, not only can levels be set in different time periods or places around the world, but they can also be affectionate genre parodies. An early set of levels recreate famous fairy tales like Red Riding Hood and Beauty and the Beast, but starring the mischievous monkeys. It makes interrupting them all the funnier when they have to drop their acting and run away in goofy costumes, creating memorable moments in systems overlaps when monkeys dressed as cowboys and ninjas remember that they have appropriate props to fight back with. What's fun is that this dress-up isn't limited to just the apes, and in fact both protagonists can participate in the cosplay. A first in the series, players have the choice of either a male or female presenting kid to go off ape capturing, and due to its novelty, I decided for my playthrough to go with girly girl Yumi. In the game's backstory, Yumi is a Japanese pop star, which gives her mission of rounding up apes a somewhat vengeful tinge, because their TV appearance has eaten into her airtime. It also introduces a fun mechanic of sorts that could be considered an easy mode. Certain apes won't attack Yumi, and instead will flump over with huge hearts in their eyes because they're infatuated with her, making it easier to capture them. A new multi-purpose gadget introduced to Ape Escape 3 is the Morph Gear. When fully charged, it allows either protagonist to transform into a new costume and identity. Like how each gadget was a demonstration of the second analog synergy with on-screen action, these costumes are a fun demonstration of all the kinds of genre opportunities of a twin-stick control scheme. My favourite in particular is the Wild West kit that temporarily turns Ape Escape into a third-person shooter, where your 6 guns fire nets to capture apes. It shifts the game from stealth reactivity, where there's tension in trying to get close to an ape, into pure action as they can now be caught from range. A small shame is that the costumes don't factor into stealth, for example, making it less likely a cowboy monkey will notice Yumi in similar garb on a Wild West soundstage. Another downside is that costume use is limited by a dwindling energy supply, making them more like traditional power-ups than strategic tools to be deployed. Perhaps if I were to suggest a change, I would keep costumes in the game but maybe limit them to just Yumi, creating a second Ape Escape-like game inside a more traditional one. If the male protag is Solid Snake for kids, Yumi instead would be more like IO Interactive's Hitman, where social stealth would overtake sneaking as a means of capturing apes. It also fit with a pop star background, and fit with the TV show tone of frequent costume changes. Although this was the first time I had played either Ape Escape 2 or 3, neither were able to impress me the same way as Ape Escape 1 does. While this sentiment could be affected by nostalgia, it presents the possibility that Ape Escape might not have had the evolutionary potential hinted at by its initial outing. Elements like costume changes and varying protagonist effects in Ape Escape 3 offer glimpses of where the series could go, but they are only minor adjustments to the core formula. A stark contrast to Mario's versatility, as seen in games as diverse as Super Mario Odyssey and Bowser's Fury. Another possibility for Ape Escape's short-lived success is that Sony didn't understand what to do with the apes. It's worth noting that their attempts to create appealing mascots were less successful than third-party developers, and while Nintendo had Mario and Sega had Sonic, Sony instead heavily relied on characters like Crash Bandicoot and Spyro the Dragon to build the PlayStation brand. But as the industry began to mature, Sony sought to position itself as a contender in the realm of high-quality entertainment, akin to prestige television. Ape Escape then found itself in a peculiar position. From its inception, the series targeted a younger audience, leveraging vibrant graphics, a Saturday morning cartoon presentation, and cheerful voice acting. While there were characters driving the adventure, they played second fiddle to the game's simian stars. The experience of playing Ape Escape itself exudes a sense of whimsy, contrasting with the more serious direction Sony was gradually adopting. Comparing Sony in 1999 to today, that sense of inventiveness that bore Ape Escape seems all but forgotten. Consider their current lineup. All third-person adventure games featuring conventionally attractive characters in cinematic worlds. While undeniably popular, their success stems from their predictability, as well as ballooning graphical budgets. This stifled innovation risks video game carcinization, or in layman's terms, all new Sony games trending towards only guaranteed genres, concepts, and controls. When you play The Last of Us, Spider-Man, or God of War, you don't need to ask what the right stick does, because it's been doing exactly the same thing since the turn of the millennium. Ape Escape is that odd evolutionary outlier that, through its continued existence, reminds us of the path Sony could have taken. Innovations like the CD format and of course the DualShock may seem simple now, but it's because we've been using them the exact same way since the early 2000s. But strange outliers showed their great potential, whether it was the cinematic presentations of Metal Gear Solid or the child-friendly stealth action of Sony's own Ape Escape. I supposed at the beginning of this video how the world would look if apes had become the dominant species, and to that, I wonder how video games could have looked if Ape Escape became the standard. Fortunately, it's not too difficult to imagine. Since the GameCube era, Nintendo have embraced a novelty to their controllers that Sony explored in Ape Escape. In fact, a successor to that game might be Nintendo's own remake of Super Mario 64. When the DS was introduced in 2004, the iconic N64 analog stick was no longer available to use. However, some of its effects could be emulated via the console's bottom touchscreen. It was an odd implementation, and so other means to direct Mario and friends were included. But to sweeten the deal, 64DS also added new levels, playable characters, and even multiplayer action. If that wasn't enough, Super Mario 64 DS introduced an entire playroom of touchscreen-driven minigames to be collected. It's similar to Ape Escape 1's inclusion of collectible minigames that demonstrated a few extra concepts that wouldn't fit in the main game, like the Snowboard Kids-inspired skiing game, a twin-stick space shooter, and a boxing game that predates Fight Night Round 3's groundbreaking dual analog control scheme. In some ways, Mario 64 DS's minigames too were an early demonstration and training tool for subsequent touchscreen-driven iPhone games, building an early literacy. What's cool is that these minigames can only be unlocked through the inclusion of a familiar friend. The legacy of Mips the Rabbit lives on in an entire brood of star bunnies that hop around the castle grounds, appearing from moment 1 to teach Yoshi the DS's new control scheme through a playful chase sequence. Around the same time, Sony also remade Ape Escape for its all-new PlayStation Portable. However, rather than rework the game around that console's limited control scheme, Ape Escape on the Loose removed usable face buttons and simplified actions, effectively neutering a once innovative experience. It's telling that the Nintendo DS signaled the beginning of a new Nintendo, where ideas came before iteration. Innovative control schemes like the Wiimote and the Nintendo Switch's cavalcade of toys have opened up brand new creative opportunities in game design. Meanwhile, the failure of the PSP and PS3 would get Sony to play more conservatively from then on, focusing on known quantities. As Nintendo learned from taking their lump early on, Sony will learn to innovate. Again. Perhaps, however, Sony's future lies not with the apes, but with the Astrobots. Team Asobi's adorable automaton has starred in several games built to demonstrate new technologies like VR goggles and the PS5, reminiscent of how Ape Escape was associated with the innovative DualShock. In fact, his latest outing, the PS5 exclusive Astro's Playroom, serves as a comprehensive 3D platformer designed to highlight features of the DualSense controller. Like Ape Escape 3 also, it's an adventure that takes the pint-sized automaton into Sony-themed worlds full of Astrobots acting out famous game set-pieces. And sure, while these devices haven't disrupted the standard, they do herald a great potential for Sony and games in general. As for Ape Escape, it will always represent the evolutionary leap from Super Mario 64 that I always wanted. And it's ironic that it came from Nintendo's biggest competition. While I'd love the series to return, I can admit its appeal comes from its subversive design, and in light of Sony's stagnation in 2024, that has ripened like a banana. But if Mario and Sonic can continue to evolve today, honing in on their obstacle course and high-speed gameplay respectively, then maybe Ape Escape could re-emerge by focusing on its own unique synergies. Ultimately, I wanted more from the second and third game, and I can think of a few ideas of how the series could be reintroduced back into the gaming wilderness. Ape Escape teases at interesting systems that go beyond the ape's artificial intelligence, and a fourth game could help the series fully transition into a Monkey Gear Solid. While stalking enemies and toyetic gadgets have been explored in games like MGS and Splinter Cell, there remains an opportunity for Ape Escape to carve out its own niche in the space. It's not completely far-fetched, considering the Snake vs. Monkey and Metal Gear Solid modes that fully blended Ape Escape with the world of Hideo Kojima's MGS. Since those games, we've witnessed significant advancements in the stealth genres that Ape Escape could build on. For one thing, unlike most stealth titles where enemies actively pursue the player character, the Ape Escape series is unique in that the apes only attempt to escape, presenting an intriguing concept that could have been further explored. One aspect I overlooked when talking about Ape Escape is a gadget called the Monkey Radar that points to and transmits video of apes uninterrupted, alongside their name, personality traits, and statistics. Later games include new data like their birthday and stomach fullness. The notion of monkey hunger brings to mind the strategy of depleting guard stamina by destroying food outposts in Metal Gear Solid 3, making them easier to evade. Perhaps utilising bananas to influence ape behaviour could create more gameplay possibilities, like say persuading them to join the human captors. When considering the potential plot for Ape Escape 4, one can't help but envision a humorous take on Sony's current identity, similar to Astro's Playroom. Amidst the backdrop of incredibly serious human stories in these games, why not introduce the apes to add a touch of levity? A television-themed setup would provide ample opportunity for parodies of Sony's prestigious IPs like The Last of Us or God of War, featuring monkeys in costume portraying characters such as Ellie and Kratos, causing chaos on set. Iconic Sony moments like the train derailment in Uncharted 2 or the Gascoigne fight in Bloodborne could also be reimagined with Ape Escape's kid-friendly stealth action. All these concepts boil down to a desire to see the series evolve while retaining its essence. Unlike Super Mario, whose jumping defined his core identity, the apes require a more nuanced approach. Simplifying their role to become the stars of a child-friendly stealth series could fulfill this desire. In the absence of new Metal Gear Solid games, such a direction could even be appreciated by all audiences. But what do you think? Was Ape Escape a series you miss, or one you missed out on? How would you like to see it return in 2024? Let me know your thoughts. I'm James, and I'll see you all in the next upload.